I am calling to order the regular meeting of the City of Atascadero Planning Commission meeting. And Commissioner Schmidt is going to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay, can we get a roll call, please?
Commissioner Anderson, Commissioner
Here.
Carranza,
Here.
Commissioner Heath,
Here.
Commissioner Schmidt,
Here.
Vice Chairperson Vanden Eyck,
Here.
Chairperson Keen.
Here.
For the record, Commissioner Hughes is an excused absence tonight, so we have 6 present and 1 absent.
Okay, can I get an approval of the agenda, please?
I'll make the motion, please.
I'll second that.
Commissioner Schmidt,
Yes.
Vice Chairperson Vanden Eyck,
Yes.
Commissioner Anderson,
Yes.
Commissioner Carranza,
Yes.
Commissioner Heath,
Yes.
Chairperson Keen.
Yes.
Motion passes 6-0.
Okay, I'm going to open public comment. This portion of the meeting is reserved for persons wishing to address the commission on any matter not on this agenda and over which the commission has jurisdiction. Do we have anyone on Zoom?
No public comment on Zoom.
Okay, and there's no one here in the audience, so I will close public comment and move on to the consent calendar.
I'll make the motion to approve the consent agenda. I'll second it.
Commissioner Schmidt,
Yes.
Commissioner Anderson,
Yes.
Commissioner Carranza,
Yes.
Commissioner Heath,
Yes.
Vice Chairperson Vanden Eyck,
Yes.
Chairperson Keen.
Yes.
Motion passes 6-0.
Okay, so we're going to move on to the public hearings. Tonight we have our objective design standards, which should be a rollicking good time. First, we're going to disclose any ex parte communications. Commissioner Heath?
I did meet with Kelly and Phil just to kind of discuss some of the definitions.
Commissioner Anderson?
I do had
Pardon
a
me.
nice meeting with Phil and
You
Kelly, and we discussed some different overviews of what was intended. So that was clarifying.
I also met with Kelly and Phil.
Okay. Commissioner Carranza?
I got to have a great talk with Kelly and Phil as well.
Commissioner Schmidt?
I too had a very informative meeting with staff on the objectives.
I
Very
did as
helpful.
well, but Phil only popped into mine. I only got him for a second. Okay, so I believe this is your turn, staff, to wow us with your objective design standards.
Thank you, Chair and members of the commission. Good evening. We're proud to bring this to you. It's been quite a work effort for the past year. We've got a consultant helping us out with MIG, and she'll be on a bit tonight as well, showing us kind of the basics of the objective design standards. If you wouldn't mind forwarding the slide, please, Kelly. So basically, there's 2 different components here. There's the objective design standards, which cover multifamily and mixed-use development. And then there's a series of edits to Title IX, which is our zoning regulations, that pertain slightly to the objective design standards, but they aren't the objective design standards. There are other components that have been impacted by this whole exercise that needed updating. And then we're going to, of course, give you a recommendation. Ultimately, this project results in code amendments that will need to go to the city council, and then ultimately for a second reading and for adoption. So we hope to do that in June. Is it, Kelly, our date now at this point? So in summary, what this will do is establish objective building and site design standards. We hope and I think it will streamline the process. Basically means that someone comes in, they comply with the objective design standards, they proceed to go with a construction permit. Means no review, no use permit, no discretionary review. The idea is that we're actually being able to put in some local influence. Now, these aren't design architectural standards, so we don't govern architecture with these standards. We simply govern, I'll call it performance standards. So things that relatively impact the form of a building, but not the design of a building, if that makes any sense. Now, lastly, if there is a unique design that comes in, they can still move forward. That would just need to go through the normal conditional use permit process that we currently have in place for multifamily projects that are over 12 units. So this program would bump that number up to 49 units. So anything 50 or more would still have to get a conditional use permit, but our threshold now is pretty high. And so any of those projects can go through these OWS and go straight to construction permit. So I would like to now introduce Genevieve with MIG, and she's going to take you through some of the background and some of the great details. And she knows this stuff really well because she's been helping out other local communities with it, like Paso Robles. And all of the local communities are going through this exercise as a result of state law. So this is all to comply with state law and to help us come along and streamline our process. So let's move forward. Hi, Genevieve.
Hi there. Thank you, Phil. And good evening. I'm Genevieve Shera with MIG. Thank you, Planning Commission, so much for having me here tonight to talk about objective design standards. I'll give a little bit of background to expand on what Phil introduced there, and talk a little bit more just about the concept of objective design standards. So these objective design standards, we've been saying those words a lot over the last couple of years. Those are the standards. What we mean by that is those standards that can be quantified or measured. And as Phil said, state law is really leading jurisdictions towards more and more of these types of standards to streamline approval of projects and really remove subjectivity, that back and forth between applicants and decision makers, ultimately, hopefully, reducing discretion in the decision-making process and streamlining the process as a whole. So by adopting objective standards locally, we can tailor the design to address those issues that are most critical to the local Atascadero context. Also, just to note, the city requested and received grant funding to fund the development of the amendments that you see tonight. So historically, cities really have used both the subjective and objective criteria to evaluate projects. Subjective standards usually include the word should, or talk about compatibility and other kinds of generic kind of design ideas that are intended to kind of guide an applicant towards an outcome, but are really a little bit hard to interpret consistently. So historically, a project would go through DRC or have a CUP with conditions that would get the project to the design that was desired. But we have new changes to state law that are really trying to reduce that number of subjective, kind of we know a good project when we see it processes. So instead, these objective design standards have to be relied upon. And so these are standards that you can read without having to result in two different interpretations by two different people. So we've got measurements, we've got performance standards, and really clear language to guide this. We've also included, to make it just as unequivocally clear as possible, we've got some user-friendly checklists, which Kelly will also discuss, which is really intended to make the process as clear for staff, the applicant, and the public as possible. So where will these new standards apply? State law states that objective standards should really apply to all new multifamily residential projects and any mixed-use projects. And so these are going to apply to any duplexes, triplexes, all the way up to mid-rises or mixed use as well, if they meet the objective standards that we've crafted. The objective design standards will apply in all of the city zones that allow those uses. So multifamily or residential, and mixed use zones. So with these new standards in place, Phil touched on the process moving forward. Development that's fully compliant with these objective design standards and all other requirements of the zoning and municipal code, of course, they can go through this streamlined review process that's limited to a construction permit review, CEQA exempt, and if compliant, can be approved ministerially. However, the existing review process does remain in a variety of cases. It would remain if a project doesn't comply with the objective standards. And for any projects that are large, over 50 or more units, or any mixed-use projects that are outside of downtown. And those three categories would continue to go through that conditional use permit process, including review and approval by this planning commission. I wanted to provide a little bit of background on the process to date. We've been talking about this for a while now. I know you've been hearing about it for a while. We began back in June 2022, actually, with stakeholder interviews. We talked to city council and the fire chief, local architects, and really tried to identify what are the key issues that need to be addressed in the update. And then through 2 working sessions with the city council during that summer, we further refined what the project should be and what the general design goals should be that were really the priorities for the city of Atascadero. So in particular, we heard the desire to streamline development, but a real concern to really retain the city's existing tradition and eclectic nature, and a special focus on outdoor gathering spaces, pedestrian vitality, and careful transitions to single-family neighborhoods. So then over the next year, the staff and consultant team, including a local architect, crafted and tested some draft development standards, really with those key design goals in mind. So we tested these draft development standards against existing and proposed projects to really make sure that the design standards would work for local projects moving forward. DRC and the Planning Commission met in fall of 2023 to discuss some of the preliminary drafts for the project and provided feedback. And then in early 2024, we continued to refine the standards further with new projects that were coming in, tested the standards against those, made some modifications, and also discussed with local design professionals, developers, and property owners. Throughout the outreach discussions, we heard a common theme, which we infused into the draft standards, a balance between ensuring design quality reflects the high quality architecture that Atascadero wants, while providing the flexibility for architects and developers and property owners to complete the projects that they envision. So with that background, I'd like to dig in a little bit into the draft objective design standards. So as Phil said, the objective design standards can really be broken up into these 2 main components. The first is the part that I'll focus on first, and that is the building design standards. These are the traditional objective design standards that we think of, and that's really the design of the building itself. And the second component is basically everything else, the site planning, trash enclosures, parking, all those other amendments are scattered throughout Title IX, and we'll discuss those second, but we'll start here with the building design standards. So these building design standards were drafted to address that input and direction that we received from the community input to have some clear flexibility built into the process. So there are menus of options for various topic areas, including how you can vary a wall plane, or different materials and fenestration that you can use, or different ways that you can vary a roof to provide interest. And then there's some standards that are going to be required for all new development to comply with the objective standards. So each tier, so those categories that I just mentioned, are also referred to as tiers in the draft standards. Each of these tiers contains several different ways to approach that particular design type. So these different design elements that applicants can choose from to create their unique and high quality building designs while maintaining flexibility in the design theme. So the standards are structured so that larger buildings are required to provide more articulation or features to add to that design. The tier 1 components, these are those that are required. They're required for all new multifamily and mixed use development. This tier includes a minimum ground floor height in mixed-use buildings to maintain viable commercial spaces, minimum transparency requirements for both residential and non-residential spaces for buildings. So those are the windows and doors, percentages, and a limit on how long a blank wall could be. Tier 2 design strategies pertain to wall plane variation. So this tier is really important. It's critical to the creation of depth perception in a building and the creation of what's really important, shade and shadow within the building design. There's been studies in the past that looked at what does the average person, when they say they like a particular building, what is the common feature that exists throughout all of those buildings? And it was found that it is that shade and shadow that really makes the difference in how appealing it is to the human eye. So there's many ways in which a wall plane variation can occur, and we didn't want to limit to a particular design architecture that could, not be conducive to certain types of design elements. So we wanted to provide a lot of different design options in this option. So for this tier in particular, longer and larger buildings are required to provide more forms of wall plane variation, and they can choose from a variety. They can choose to include balconies or plazas, upper story setbacks, or any other kind of general massing break that breaks up the building. Small buildings and duplex and cottage clusters would be exempt from this requirement. Tier 3 design strategies focus on what's called fenestration and materials. Sometimes people refer to this as kind of the gingerbread on the building, but it's really a critical piece in creating interest in building design. Fewer components are required for duplexes and cottage clusters in this tier. But projects can really choose from a wide variety of options to enhance the facades in this tier, including larger windows, including window trim or a window sill or a lintel on the windows. Other types of design like post and beam architecture can also comply, or including a secondary cladding material. So lots of options in here to provide for variation. And when we've tested this against projects, it was very clear that there's many ways to meet the intent, and that projects can get to achieve this goal through a variety of different ways while having added intrigue. The final tier, tier 4, focuses on roof design. And this is really to encourage roof features that provide additional shade or shadow in kind of the more traditional residential, kind of having a larger eave and rakes and cornices. And also having the option to provide more roof variation with different types of roof styles or increasing gables. There's a variety of different options of ways that this can be met. And there's fewer requirements under the projects in downtown, recognizing the likelihood for more of a kind of flat roof style. A key consideration in the implementation of objective design standards is how does it work on the ground, especially when that multifamily or mixed use project is interfacing with an adjacent single family zone. So the standards were crafted to minimize visual impacts for that adjacent single family zone, while really trying to think carefully about how to retain development viability for the non-residential or multifamily property. So the standards are included to provide a couple of options for providing a setback between the building and the single family district as indicated here. So a building could set back upper stories 16 feet or the full building 15 feet. And in addition, other considerations are required, including not orienting balconies towards the adjacent single family property, including a solid wall is required, and a landscape buffer, which will reach maturity with tall trees. A new cottage cluster section is also included with the objective design standards. And the intent here is to provide some flexibility so that the existing setback requirements don't constrain a cottage cluster type development. So these cottage clusters are really intended to foster a more affordable by design style, smaller houses and duplexes. Standards that were crafted center on providing a common courtyard with outdoor open space, which was a key desired design goal throughout the project. Private yards and private garages would be minimized. And then of note, this new section would facilitate future small lot subdivisions as well outside of the more cumbersome plan development process. Now I'll turn it back to city staff to discuss those proposed amendments in the other section of the zoning code.
Here's the fun stuff. Title IX. This is the other things that are outside of the objective design standards. So this is where we get into the interesting things like fractional density. Fractional density is one of my favorites, actually, because it's something I used to work with quite a bit. In a previous city I worked with in San Luis Obispo, they had this for many years, worked quite effectively, and it really incentivizes affordability by design. In other words, for a smaller unit, it's a smaller density count. So you can do more smaller units or you can do fewer larger units. For example, in this proposal, a unit up to 600 square feet would only equal a half a density unit. Unit that would be over 600 square foot might be 0.66 of a unit. And then units over 1,000 square feet would finally get to that one density unit. So this program is something that's optional, don't have to use it, but it's there should you want to fit some additional smaller units and still within that density boundary that you've got in that district. So I think it's a really good tool. It's not something that's typically included in objective design standards, but something we wanted to include at the same time as a zoning text amendment. And then also going with maximum average unit size. Now pay close attention to the word average. I think 1,200 square foot is the proposal here. And we're not saying that the units have to all be less than 1,200 square feet, but in the downtown to encourage greater density and actually to encourage projects to meet their maximum density, we're talking about this average maximum unit size of 1,200 square foot. So it means you could have several units that are 2,000 square foot, several units that are 800 square foot, several units that are 600 square foot, and you're still going to meet that average when you average it all out. This is something that's quite important because we see a lot of projects that have very large units and we don't maximize the actual number of units. We don't maximize the density on the property because it just can't fit within the form that we allow for. And so then we fall short, commonly on our RHNA for that reason. And this is really only a predicament in a multifamily zone or a downtown mixed use zone where you want to fit in that large number of units. That's where we have that issue. So let's talk about some open space. Again, kind of going back to some tier 1 amenities, and Kelly is going to give you some of these details and tell you about some of these features.
Couldn't remember when we were switching over.
This is it. Thank you.
So our next major section in Title IX is our open space section. Our current code just has a flat square footage requirement per unit of open space, and it doesn't really list any sort of amenity or design requirements for that open space. So we tend to get a lot of detention basins that we count as open space and some non-usable areas that counts as open space. And we find that open space is really key to sort of more of a community design amongst multifamily and can really add to the value of and sense of place. So the direction that council gave us at one of their previous hearings was to actually reduce the square footage per unit of open space, but then have a bunch of standards that would require greater quality and greater detail in terms of what amenities are provided. And we similarly invoked a menu style option like we did with objective design building standards so that people could have some variety and flexibility. If they had a larger site, they could do some more native and open space type amenity. And if they had a smaller, more urban environment, they could do plazas or forecourts, things of that nature. So Our first tier within our open space standards are kind of basic elements of open space. So, you know, how can you incorporate those site amenity areas? And you can do that through courtyards, other types of open landscaped amenity spaces. You might incorporate public art into an amenity space, or you might have some mature tree preservation on the site, not necessarily native, but some really great shade trees that you want to preserve that provide a lot of amenity to the existing site. Our second tier focuses on sort of those amenity enhancements and things that people could fully utilize as part of their amenity spaces. So this would include seating in those open space areas, potentially a dog run for certain types of residential projects, play areas for children, fire pits could also be incorporated, things like an outdoor barbecue or kitchen area, and a pool or a spa for usually for those larger projects. So these are things that are going to bring people out and make a useful space. Our third tier focuses more on greenery and landscape material. So we're looking to incorporate some vertical elements, whether that be through the landscaping that you choose that grows up taller to help screen and provide that shade and shadow through landscaping, as Genevieve mentioned previously. It might be a green wall. It could be a community garden with certain features such as a place for tool storage and composting. You could incorporate edible plants or native plants into your design as well. And on larger projects, you might be able to incorporate a trail system around the development, and that would count as well. So in general, when we looked at our landscape section, we have a lot of standards right now that incorporate a minimum percentage of landscape area, landscape fingers and parking lots a certain distance, and general site coverage standards in terms of setback areas that need to be landscaped. When we looked at developing standards that focused a little bit more on amenity, these standards became less important to incorporate. So that we could allow some site flexibility in terms of design and usability and really hone in on the standards that we felt were most important for quality of life. So we focused on amenity spaces, providing some street trees along our frontages, and then flexible parking lot planting to still provide shade for cars, but to not dictate landscape fingers and very specific planting standards for those kinds of trees. We also incorporated some garage standards, and I think Genevieve mentioned these as part of the cottage cluster standard, but we did want to bring some specific attention to it. Throughout previous development in Atascadero, the garage and the automobile has been a very big focus of our multifamily development. We find a lot of interest in our area in slightly larger units that have private yards and private garages, and the new trend, and people are asking more for more community-based design where they have some shared amenity spaces. They perhaps have private area in a yard off to the side or a porch area or a deck. And that really necessitates the car being pushed to the outside somewhat. So we do have some standards that limit garage size when they're private garages attached to units to try and make them disappear a little bit more and not be so auto-dominated. We also have some standards about how many units can have a private garage to try and accommodate those community spaces and not give all of that land over to a driveway to be able to get to the garage. So we're hoping to encourage those amenity spaces a little bit over vehicular spaces. And it's a way to also help applicants meet those amenity space requirements as well. We also touched upon solid waste standards in our code. We have not many solid waste standards currently, and we have seen an issue with a lot of individual bins on multifamily projects that then get pushed out towards the street, and it takes up on-street parking. They're usually placed in bike lanes on streets that we have bike lanes. They're sometimes placed in front of driveways because we now have 3 bins per unit. And they all have to be placed 3 feet apart for a standard trash truck to come pick them up. So we did look at consolidating that into shared trash facilities. Doesn't necessarily have to be a dumpster, depending on the number of units. You could have bins if the trash company says that that's adequate. You could still roll them out to the street, but they would be a shared type situation to minimize the number of bins. And then we have some standards for what those shared trash enclosures might look like in terms of covering, making sure the materials are consistent with the architecture of the buildings. and making sure we have enough room for recycling trash and compostables. We also have some allowances to place trash in a front setback if that makes the best sense for design and if it can be designed appropriately into buildings. And that's the best place to be serviced for the trash company. We also looked at our storage standards. So our current code requires 100 cubic feet of storage and doesn't mention much else beside that. When we actually looked at storage standards, we looked at what do people in these more dense multifamily developments need storage for. And a lot of that are bikes or outdoor play equipment that they might take to a park if they have children. Their Christmas decor and things of that nature that don't always get stored in the house in a closet. And we found that a lot of applicants were meeting the storage requirement by providing a wall of bookshelves or something of that nature that didn't really give people usable storage that they needed. So we actually have shifted to a slight increase in the size of storage that would be required per unit to accommodate something like a bike locker or storage under the stairs that could fit that type of those type of items. But we also have allowances for combined storage throughout the development. So if you wanted to have, similar to our microhomes development, a shared storage facility where you could store bikes and lock them up and they were secure for all of the residents, or if you wanted to have a couple garages or sheds throughout along the property line that residents could use, that could be accommodated as well. So those storage standards are a little bit more flexible and a little bit larger to accommodate people's needs. We also looked at lighting standards. So our current lighting standards do require full shielding of lighting and no glare visible off-site. That can be a little bit open to interpretation on, you know, how tall a human is that can see the glare from the light and how tall the light poles can be. So we added some additional standards to clarify that. And we used a lot of standards that we typically see in our conditions of approval for use permits about parking lot pole height, a specific shielding of lighting that has a certain dimension of shield that the lens needs to be either recessed or shielded. And then dark sky compliance, which is a major focus in Atascadero as well and part of our current general plan. And then, of course, we have some exceptions written in there for decorative lighting, which we didn't really have before. I don't know that in the 80s when the lighting code was written, they had a lot of festoon and decorative lighting, but we wanted to make sure that our multifamily areas and amenity spaces and our mixed use areas and commercial areas could utilize that decorative lighting. I'm going to turn it back over to Phil.
At staff, we're trying to mix it up a little bit. So we give you different perspectives, different voices. This one's important, street trees. Now, our code right now requires that new development projects put in street trees generally every 30, 35 feet. In downtown, it's different because the street trees are generally in the public right of way. They're in the public sidewalk. That's where it makes sense in downtown. Downtown is a much more intensive area. We have different standards for downtown. So one of the things that we were trying to do through this process is amend the code so that projects outside of the downtown could also incorporate these street trees, but not in the public right of way, not in the sidewalk, instead on private property. And that's where they're more readily maintained by private property owners. That's where they don't interrupt the public right of way, damage the sidewalk, damage the infrastructure, and there's space for them. So we initially proposed 15 foot for a setback for buildings to fit these trees, which is consistent with what we have in our code today. Right now, our code actually calls out for a 15-foot setback for residential projects that are outside of the downtown, even those residential projects that are within a commercial zone, like a mixed-use project. So the proposed code doesn't really change that particular standard, but what we need to do is clarify, you know, what this setback standard is. There's also a notation of a corner setback issue there. We'll talk about that a little later. Now, what's been happening with these mixed-use projects outside of downtown, they're all discretionary and they'll continue to be. So with each one, we look at them on a case-by-case basis. And we determine how street trees can fit in there, how we can meet the intent of the code. But as part of these standards, we want to make it a little more clear, a little more succinct. As we get further and further away from the conditional use permit process and we see more and more by right projects, We want to also have standards that have, that people can understand and read and know what they're going to have to do when they develop a project. So we're trying to figure out a way to fit in street trees in these projects without creating what a concern has been expressed, which is a taking of property. In other words, introducing a significant setback on a new commercial project on some of these narrower lots in El Camino and still fit in these street trees. But at the same time, we can't really fit them in the public right of way. Is there another slide here? Oh yeah, so let's keep going. I'm probably talking ahead before I should. So I'm backing up a little bit. Outside of downtown, we typically see the street trees in the back of sidewalk. I think the image on the far right, is that a Morrow Road picture? On the far right there?
I think that's actually Templeton.
Is that actually Templeton? Okay. Well, you might be familiar with some of the sites in town you've seen these images. Anyway, on Morrow Road, we've got a couple of sites that have street trees that are on private property in that little setback zone. And it's kind of deceiving. You think, oh my gosh, those trees look so close to the building. But some of these are actually, 10, 12, 14 feet away from the building, which is still really, really close. So really what you need for a tree to be able to grow to fruition is you need a distance of about at least 12 to 15 feet from a building, from a structure. And at the same time, that tree probably needs to be at least between 3 to 6 feet away from concrete paving, etc., so that it has a root area to establish and it doesn't interrupt the sidewalk and other features. So what we're trying to figure out and what we'd like your feedback on is how to work this out. We've got several options. And we have a list of options on the next slide. I'm not going to go there yet, though. These are a couple more images. So a blaring one there is the new social services building on El Camino Real, just south of is it Montecito Road at El Camino Real, right across the street from the new Arco station. That's a situation where it had a street tree requirement, but we weren't able to fit them in there. They weren't able to fit the building on this site. And the code allows commercial buildings to actually be a 0-foot setback. So they're allowed to build right at the property line, which is what you want in a downtown commercial zone. So it doesn't leave room for those street trees. But at the same time, we try to incorporate those. So the building on the right, Moresco Plaza, it actually had some larger trees in it. Those began to interrupt the building, so they took them out, and now it has these smaller trees in it. But there's actually, is it a 12-foot setback on that building? Doesn't look like it, but there's a 12-foot setback on that building. So, and what's called the Brickyard on the top left there, it's got a 10-foot setback on the building. And the trees are actually planted, instead of being right between the building and the street, they're planted at these breaks in the building where there's a division between a building or an entryway. And they're kind of grouped together with a much wider spacing. So that's one of the options. So kind of think of those images. And so what we're wanting to bring to City Council and what we'd like your feedback on is how do we incorporate street trees outside of the downtown in a commercial district along the street without taking property away from these property owners, without having them in the public right of way, and still meeting the intent of all of our policies, which is to have this urban greening and this urban streetscape. One of those options would be to play with the spacing, kind of like we saw in one of those images, pull the trees further apart and position them so that there's natural breaks in the building where the building can have a greater setback for a portion, and we can still fit a cluster of trees in there. Or do we, maintain that normal tree spacing of 30 foot, but allow a little bit of the tree planter to encroach into the sidewalk? So being right at that line between the private property and public right of way. Or should we reduce the distance between trees and buildings and not allow any encroachment and allow that flexibility? But the problem we've seen when we do that with number 3 is eventually the property owners will have to either dramatically trim that tree or remove it as it begins to damage the building and it becomes that conflict. So that's a little bit problematic. Or 4, Nick DeBar, Public Works Director, loves this one. I'm speaking sarcastically. Recommend all planting in the city right away and develop a plan, and that is utilities, maybe avoiding utilities, avoiding sight lines, eliminating potentially a travel lane, And then, of course, we introduce, concerns about sidewalk maintenance. And then we're talking about staffing additional people to maintain those trees. So that's kind of a big ask. Not sure we love that one, but we have to put all options on the table. And then lastly, could we require bigger trees at a wider spacing with a distance, appropriate distance to buildings, and smaller trees in between them with lesser distance requirements? So kind of playing with different ideas. But one of the original ideas I'll go back to that we came with is just saying, okay, let's make sure all new commercial buildings are 15 foot back from the right of way. So we've got space to put the tree. The tree could be planted within 3 to 4 feet of the public right of way. So it still has room to grow adjacent to the sidewalk. But with that recommendation, we did get some pushback already from the public. We got some pushback from council that blanket setback is too much of a taking from our property. So can we play with that a little bit? That's really the spirit of what we're asking for here. And I think that there's some happy medium in there that we could bring forward to council, or is there other options that we can get creative?
Do you want to comment right now?
No.
Okay.
What we're going to do is we're going to go back through all of your questions and comments, and then we'll take this one apart a little bit. And we'll kind of focus in on that one because that's one of the tougher ones here that we've heard some feedback on.
I'm gonna
So
try
in-
not
in-
to forget.
We won't forget. I
I
know
said
there's a
I'm
lot.
gonna try not to forget.
Oh yeah, we
Yeah.
won't forget either. So anyway, so I'm going to conclude and say that implementation of these standards are really intended to help streamline the review of multifamily projects. We really want to make this, a predetermined list that people can look to. In fact, we have some checklists, I think, that were sent to you with late attachment, that if people comply with those, that they get a free pass and they go straight to a construction permit for a 40 or 45 unit project, which is a substantial size project. It's pretty fantastic. The idea is that these are flexible menu lists where they can choose different options to comply. They're not stuck with a one size fits all. They have different features based on the size and scale of their project. And it allows for flexibility while having design standards that are scaled to that project. And again, these are not architectural standards that set architectural styles. Instead, they're objective standards about form, massing, setbacks, height, even color, transparency, windows, etc. So last slide. Is there any big celebration at the end? It's been a long presentation. So the next steps, you can suggest changes. We are going to move forward to introduce this to City Council for adoption. We do hope to have this in effect this summer so that we can focus the rest of our time and attention and staff time on the general plan update. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil and Kelly. It was a wonderful presentation. So I'm going to open it up to the commission for comment, and since I have the mic, I get to go first. So my first question is, and we kind of talked about this a little bit, but how does the density bonus affect these? I mean, like, do they get to throw out the design standards as well as, like, what do they get to throw out and what do they not get? My thought is, do they get to come in and build a square building with none of the design standards because they're like, oh, we have a density bonus and make a big ugly building?
That could happen. It all depends on the level of concessions that they're eligible for based on the level of density bonus that they're doing. But if they ask for relief, from standards, they can. So certainly there is a chance that a project that does have some affordability and it complies with that basic, 10% affordability, and then they get the density bonus. They don't have to use the density bonus, but they get these concessions.
Would they then, because they don't conform to the objective design standards, would they then come before us? So we would at least get to see the project before it gets approved?
They would not by state law. I did want to point out that part of what we're trying to do with our adoption of our state density bonus code as part of this amendment is we're really trying to just refer to state law rather than repeat state law. But what we have done is similar to what we did with SB 9. So we have said that we waive other standards and development requirements prior to waiving open space requirements or additional parking reductions, because what we've heard from council and what we know from the design of successful multifamily is that those two things really need to be held most sacred. And that we're willing to waive other standards before we waive those to ensure that we can hold on to those standards as much as possible.
Okay. That's good. And then my other thing was, talking about the street trees thing. I was kind of sort of brainstorming in my head and thinking of something sort of like the fractional density kind of combined with the menu thing where so if they have 20 feet of frontage, then they have to have so many units of trees, and then each different kinds of trees are worth different units. And then, so if they just want 2 big street trees, then they would have to incorporate that into the design. Whereas if they'd rather have 4 or 5 smaller trees, then they could incorporate that into the design. But then they're sort of feeling like it's kind of like they're making the choice as to what greenery they want to incorporate into their plan, rather than us saying like, you have to have this thing. So, 20 square feet of frontage, you have to have 2 units of street trees. And, like, I don't know anything about trees, but a 30-gallon bucket is 1 unit. So that's the size. And then along with that, say like, so if it's if it's this certain kind of trees and it needs this setback, if it's this kind of tree, it needs this setback or whatever. I don't know if architects know about trees either. So, but that's just kind of what I was thinking, is to sort of frame it in a way that gives them flexibility, but it's still within what we want.
Is that a question?
No, that was my comment to you. You were
Oh.
asking for feedback and
So
comments
here's
and
what we should do.
ideas.
Here's what we should do. Let's start with, I should have laid this out for you. Sorry. Let's start with questions you have
Okay.
on our presentation. Then let's go out to the public, see if there's anybody here from the public or online if you've had any questions. And then we'll come back and then you can do your discussion and comments and we'll go through all those discussion items.
Okay.
If that works.
Anybody else with questions? Yes. Commissioner Anderson.
I have a quick question. These standards, obviously you've done a lot of work. Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Kelly, for clarifying a bunch of stuff. I just don't want these standards to in any way discourage people from going through the normal process. It's like, oh, it's gonna be a pain to go through the regular process of getting the design that I want. So I'll just go with these standards. Are you guys gonna have a culture of, working with designers or working with builders to say, we're here so that you can have your project. And if your project complies with these ODS, then great. But if it doesn't, we're gonna help you through the regular process. You guys pretty much already have that, but I just want to make sure that that's reiterated, because I love cities when I go there and it's kind of a little eclectic. And I just don't, down south, you go down there and they've got these standards that are just every single area is exactly the same.
Yeah, and I
just gets a
think
little boring.
that's why we developed them with a menu of options. We recognize that some buildings might have flat roofs. We recognize some buildings might have gable roofs. We recognized a lot of different architectural styles and materials. And so we really want this to be flexible and eclectic, because that's what a Atascadero is. And we think that a lot of people can meet the standards. So we've tested La Plaza and the Block. We've tested some very contemporary multifamily projects that have been submitted. And we've sent them to a local architect, and he's reviewed them all for our objective design standards to make sure that all of those design themes and all of those applications would meet our standards. And we did make some tweaks after that happened. We reduced a couple of our standards. We moved some standards around to ensure that we could really get that design flexibility.
If they didn't comply, then it would be just the normal procedure to go through and get those.
It would, it would be
CUPs,
a use permit. It would come before you. I think it's a pretty simple process. Of course, it's an additional application fee for them. But I think we're known as a city that doesn't, nitpick over stuff and take 18 months. We can get that through pretty quickly.
There you go. Thank you.
Commissioner Carranza.
Thank you, Chair. All right, well, I'm just gonna keep it to questions. I got lots of ideas about trees later. So I was just curious, this might be a nitpicky thing that really is more handled by things that are already going to be required aside from the ODS. But regarding the roofs and the different kinds of, they're all not the same size, calling out that specific detail of the presentation and in the ODS material. So I have some examples. They're not actually in our city limits, but it was regarding a 55 and up community that my mother's in actually. But the shared garages in between this duplex, it's a flat area and then the roofs go down and it's causing drainage issues. So is that being addressed within the, different roof styles and pitches? It really is. I think it was meant to be well intended, but it's causing lots of issues with more than one house.
No, that is not addressed, and it's generally not something that we would dictate. So people can design buildings, and if they meet building code, they can do that. What is addressed in ODS is a variety of roof styles, and that would probably meet that standard. We don't see a lot of that because of the leak issues, and generally builders are now more so than ever on the hook to remedy those and fix them. So we just don't see a lot based on that process.
Yeah, I guess my only concern with that is, it comes back on then, of course, the building owner and the developer, they're going to be incentivized to not have those kind of repercussions and be preventative about it so that they don't have mold issues in the future or leaky roofs and upset tenants and maybe even vacancies. But, then it comes back on then tenants who have deferred maintenance on their building. So that was a huge concern that I was thinking about when I was reading those. Okay. And other than that, I mean, I was curious more than anything about the grant for funding the amendments. Like, great job, whoever scored that. That is great to hear because I know that these are not a light thing that requires a lot of attention and time and funding. So I'm glad to hear it.
Commissioner Schmidt?
Is your microphone on? I just want to make sure it's getting
I'm
recorded.
sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I forgot to push my
Thank you.
button. I apologize. I'll start again. Small lot subdivisions. If a surveyor or designer incorporates the design objectives, will the subdivision be treated like other projects and not be discretionary and be ministerial approval?
It would still be discretionary per our code and portions of the Subdivision Map Act if it's over a certain number of units. So state law that goes into effect in July, I believe, allows for subdivisions in a multifamily zone of 10 units or less.
Mm-hmm.
So if it was less than 10 units by state law, it would be a ministerial review process. If it's over 10 units, it would be a tentative tract map, but it would comply with all standards of our objective standards in our municipal code. And so it would be really hard to make findings to deny that project.
Essentially,
but-
we'd be just reviewing the lots and lot pattern rather than the actual building design, I think, in that scenario.
No, but if I incorporate in the design, the lot layout, the examples that were provided, I was wondering then, would it be treated ministerially? Because I've incorporated all those things and be treated like an SB9 project, let's say. That's ministerial approval and doesn't have to go to the city council or the planning commission. So anyway, I don't know. I'll give an example of SB9 that I was talking about earlier. I have an SB9 project in Rover Beach. It's a quarter mile from the major transit corridor. And so the owner wanted to incorporate no parking. I called HCD to define what major transit corridor meant. And it means having a bus go down the road every 15 minutes. So there's no place in SLO County that can incorporate that exception because no buses go down any corridor in our county every 15 minutes. So when we have design standards, are there conflicts? Do we know if there will be any conflicts with state law? Have we looked at it that deep? Do you know that?
Yeah, Genevieve is actually quite an expert at a lot of state laws as well. And I don't believe we have any conflicts with what state law says, but I saw her turn her mic off, so I'll let her speak.
That we know of.
Sure, and of course, as you know, it's always evolving, but we did take a look at all of the current state laws, including SB 684, which is going into effect in July, and integrated that into the cottage cluster discussion for that reason, to focus people to that state law as well as complying with the standards that exist in the code, so everybody's aware of the the provisions that are provided by state law and also how that feeds into the code. So the intent was to get us up to date with all of the current state laws, but of course, there's many that are on the docket for the next year.
So with respect to my example, I thought I was very versed in SB 9, but I did not know until I called HCD that was the state's definition of what a major transit corridor was. And actually the city didn't know that either. And so
yeah, that's a tricky one because the
do
public.
we know the
public
definitions?
resources.
Do we know the definitions that deeply to understand that? I guess we can, obviously, which was presented to us to me last Friday by staff, that this is kind of a starting spot. We've done a lot of work. And as we go forward, we might find some issues, some conflicts that we will correct along the way. So I did appreciate that very much, hearing that.
And I do think we did make some of those efforts early on because like you, I was also surprised by that definition and realized, oh, wow, this doesn't apply in Atascadero at all. And so we wanted to craft the standards to not say if you're, to imply that it would work when it actually doesn't.
Yeah, it only applies in San Francisco and Los Angeles, right?
Right.
In going through the outreach process that was discussed, was there any discussion about how the design standards affect costs, or whether construction costs or insurance costs, or even something as simple as recycling waste materials? It might create more waste to have to be recycled. Did anyone have that discussion during that process, that outreach process?
We did have, I'll answer that in a couple of ways. One, on the construction waste, we did not touch on that piece in particular, but in other ways, we talked with local developers and local architects, specifically looking at our tiers and our design options. And we wanted to think about the cost of the different design options. So within the tier, we didn't want to have a couple of really kind of freebie cheapo ones and then a few expensive ones that no one would do. So we really tried to place those so that there were comparable price points. We looked at particular design or construction strategies with regard to window insets, for instance, and the depth of buildings. And we talked to architects about that. We also talked, we are working in kind of tandem with Paso Robles on this update so that North County has very similar objective design standards so that folks are familiar with, both jurisdictions are very similar so that it's easier for developers and the public to understand those. And there we also had a developer looking at particular items and weighing in on cost items there.
I would just comment, I've worked with a lot of architects who really don't care about costs. They're more concerned about design and how it looks, and whether it gets built or not isn't an issue. And it's the developer who makes the draws the bottom line based on cost. There's discussion on open space and greenery, and this is an issue that I have even now, is that if these objective standards are implemented, what control, I mean, how do we ensure that they're going to be maintained and upkept in perpetuity on the properties or anywhere? I can go through many projects that we have approved here since I've been on the commission for lots of years. Landscaping plans mean nothing, and trees are cut down, they die, they're not replaced. So as we incorporate any of these objectives, design standards, not that we want it, but what policing power do we have to ensure that they're kept up?
So we do have language in our landscape section in our code that does require continued maintenance of landscaping per the requirements of the Atascadero Municipal Code. We also have some language in there about ensuring that trees and parking lot trees and street trees in particular can be maintained in a way where they reach their full height and width for maturity, because we do have a lot of projects that use growth stunting applications on trees to keep them from growing to their normal height. And obviously these trees are important for shade and shading our pedestrian way and shading our cars in our parking lot and all the asphalt that comes along with that. So we do have that as part of our municipal code. On the enforcement side, of course, it's up to council will and staffing as to whether or not we receive direction to proactively go enforce landscaping upkeep on those projects.
So we need to lobby council if we're interested, because that has been pretty much the reason that I've been given when I've asked questions, is that either we don't have the staffing to do that. Right? Sometimes even the individuals. I mean, the police department used to do code enforcement at one time, and I believe that they retired of it at some point. So are HOAs still going to be used as we incorporate the design standards as a way of policing a project?
So homeowners associations would only be required if there are a number of shared amenities in a subdivision for sale type project where there is communal space that needs to be upkept and maintained.
And those were discussed, obviously, in the presentation about sharing of storage space, sharing of other things.
Yes, if it's a subdivision that's designed with that space, they would need to have some sort of financing mechanism and somebody in charge of that.
When it comes to shared solid waste areas, it seems to me it affects the design in a certain way, because if you don't drag it out to the street, then someone has to drive in and pull it out. Is there any, in the standards we have with respect to solid waste, is there anything that addresses that?
So solid waste, again, I think we discussed it doesn't necessitate a dumpster, so they can be bins that are more easily wheeled out if the bins are large enough to accommodate the number of units that are within the site. We also have that allowance for the shared facility to be incorporated into the building design and located closer to the street, so that can be an easier way for the trash company to access the dumpster.
I guess in certain areas, parking becomes critical, and so a lot of people carry the stuff out but don't bring it back in, and it stays there for a week and a half or so. And I would say in multifamily area that would probably be less the issue, because again, people are going to want to park out there, and you can't with the cans being in the way. On the street tree discussion, and I can hear you guys trying to think through this, but I didn't hear anything about PUEs. I didn't hear anything about overhead easements. In fact, the photographs that she showed, there were two of them that had overhead wires on that. So if I encourage trees not to be within the right of way, and they're planted in the PUE or they're planted with overhead easements in the way, then as what happens now is we see along the road, the utility company comes through, carves out a hole in the top of the tree so the wires can go through. So I think you guys should consider, easements and how, especially with PUEs, that's anywhere between 5 and 7 feet behind the property line in which there is a PUE, in which you shouldn't be planting in.
All those things need to be taken into consideration when doing a development plan.
And
So
so,
through the
but-
construction permit process, we would probably not allow for trees to be in a public utility easement where there's overhead lines. That would not be acceptable.
I agree, but
So-
in your examples that you're talking about considering to present in some way, you talked about council's concern about taking a property. And so putting the trees on private property, they want it closer to the sidewalk. You mentioned 3 feet. But that would then be within the PUE. And so that in a lot of those examples, I think that just needs to be part of that thought process. Is how landscaping not
Yeah.
within the right of ways.
And I think, and it
probably
probably didn't come across on the slides because we were brainstorming today on this issue, but a lot of times we see our PUE on our non-major arterial streets. So El Camino tends to have the utilities in El Camino. We don't really have a PUE there. And those are really the streets where there's more concern about a larger setback. In our residential zones that are just multifamily, we do generally see a setback. It used to be 25 feet and we reduced it to 15. So I think people are used to a larger setback in multifamily. I think the concern really comes down to the commercial zoning districts where we allow for mixed use. And so the recommendation could be to keep the full 15 feet in our multifamily zones, 10 feet with a side setback on a corner. And then really honing in on those commercial zones and really in those commercial zones for mixed use, we're talking about El Camino and Morro Road, where we generally don't have a PUE behind the back of sidewalk.
I would agree with that.
We also have some adopted tree planting and tree standards through our Public Works Department that address appropriate trees for under power lines and not appropriate trees for under power lines. So we do already have that standard established.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Good.
Dennis brought up something that just piqued my interest. So how is, typically when we have a project that is conditioned, and a lot of the agencies I work with, they would condition undergrounding of utilities. If they go through these objective design standards, is undergrounding of utilities covered under some other
It's already in our,
municipal code or?
it's already in our muni code under
Okay.
Title 8. Our building code requires for new development projects to be undergrounded. So it doesn't require that for an existing development, but it requires it for new development.
Okay, that answers my question, actually.
Any other questions for staff? Any thoughts on the street trees? I know Commissioner Kranza has thoughts.
But I-
Anybody else? Oh, yes, let's open up for public comment.
And we do have some people on Zoom, so
Oh,
I'm hoping that they
excellent.
can use the raised hand function if they would like to speak. And we will give you a couple minutes to get that sorted out if you'd like to speak.
Yeah, if you'd like to speak, raise your hand. Please state your name for the record when you are on. And please try to limit your comments to 3 minutes. I will give you a 2-minute, 30-second warning.
I did also want to point out that we did receive, was it one public comment, Annette? And so hopefully you guys all receive that as well.
From Dennis Haggy. Oh, I'm
Yes, from
sorry, Devin
Devin.
Haggy.
Mhm.
I apologize.
No worries. I am not seeing anyone raise their hand. I think what we could do is bring it back. Oh, I see one now. Hold on. And it's Devin.
Oh, awesome. We'll give Devin the floor.
Devin, you should be able to speak if you unmute.
All right, you have me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. I didn't know if I'm allowed to still speak since I did a written public comment, but literally my kids are running in and getting burritos right now as I'm watching this meeting. Do I have permission to speak here, Kelly, or the planning council? Or
Yes,
should I
yes.
both? Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I just want to, I've been kind of hearing while my kids have been busy doing other things. Sorry I couldn't make it in person tonight. I was hoping to be there, but that's just not going to happen. My main thing is I want to first thank Kelly and the team. I've been doing a development, high density lot in the Atascadero and going through the municipal code and everything else. It's been very extensive to figure out all your requirements and make it work out and pencil out on this lot. Parking's been the number one thing. Step backs. I have a corner lot, so the setbacks on both sides has definitely been a main concern of mine. I like the overall concept of objective design standards. I think it looks, your product looks really good. I just want to make sure that my hands aren't tied too much when it comes time to do a design or development, because every time that we change a feature on a building, I have an increased cost no matter what. So trees are great, but I still think the flexibility of making each project work or pencil out should be critical to move forward with the development standards. I think that's all I can think of right now. Kind of been put on the spot, so I thank you very much, and hopefully I can still listen in.
Thank you very much, Devin.
Is there anybody else that would like to speak? Does not look
Speak
like
now or forever
we
hold your
have
peace.
anybody else.
Okay.
So I think we can continue.
I'm gonna close public comment then. And I'd actually, in Devin's letter, he does talk about parking. And I left all my notes at home, so I can't remember if parking is mentioned on the checklist. Is that one of the things on the checklist? And also he mentions the state density bonus law parking requirements. I guess I kind of, when I read that, assumed that you guys had taken that into account and that's just what we're going with.
So when we originally came to council, we did a presentation about, what are the give and takes when you do site development? Because we can say we want all the open space and we want the prettiest building and we want it low story to fit in with a Atascadero and we want all the parking because we know that we don't have good transit. And that just doesn't all fit on a site. So you have to give up some things in order to maintain other things. So they did talk about open space, but again, reducing the requirement and making it more quality. We did talk about increasing some height in some places, and we'll look at that more with our general plan update. But parking was really held dear by the council. We know what our parking situation is in a lot of Atascadero. We know that we don't have a lot of on-street parking, and some of our right-of-ways aren't wide enough to accommodate it, even if we wanted to build that out. We know that people have a decent amount of cars here because our transit, we just don't have the population to have, really well-oiled transit. So they did not choose to give us direction to reduce our parking requirements over what we have today. Of course, with the state density bonus, you can reduce parking to what the state says you can do that at. And I think the council's thought was, if you really want to reduce that parking, at least we get some affordable housing units out of it. And so there is some city benefit to having some standards that don't necessarily align with the most minimum that the state has, because then we can extract that benefit from those projects that are taking advantage of that. So specifically, we held parking at our current standards.
Okay, cool. But also Devin could come to the general plan and we could talk about parking again then too.
Yes.
Okay. Oh, I had a question and then I forgot it, but I just remembered it. Nope, it's gone. So anybody are we ready for a street tree discussion? Any other comments or questions before we start the street tree discussion? Okay. Commissioner Carranza, do you want to go first? You can.
All right, thank you. Can we first go back to the options slide so that our minds are on that again? Okay, so staff was pointing to, we have to have all options on the table, including others, and, ones that they may not like as much, and yet there's lots of different ways you can even slice it, even though it's simply written there. There's so many different sub options of each option, I feel like. So yeah, I mean, I think that the number 4, actually, if that was going to be at all on the table, I think that a street tree management draft plan presentation, or how that fits into the downtown Atascadero infrastructure enhancement plan pertaining to, enhancing appearance and walkability and safety and whatnot. I mean, I think these documents we already have really address some of the tree. It's more like a strategy I think our city's going with, and yet I see what you're doing here. At least it seems like, okay, if we get the private owners these trees on private property, then yeah, there's more, there's less ability to have to fund the maintenance of them on a city level. But yet, as my colleague here to the left of me mentioned earlier, the accountability to upkeep them and landscaping in general, and then the tree stunting stuff that Kelly was mentioning, to make sure that they're not encroaching on the building. And then if they do become outsized, then they just get ripped out and it's kind of a moot point then. So we're kind of in a conundrum as far as like how to really get strong tree development and have it be appreciating value and not get ripped out later because it just doesn't look good or work, and harming capital improvements that have already been invested in. So I see the dilemma like on all sides. This isn't necessarily a question yet or a proposition, but an exploration of like what are some of the big challenges with this? Because it's easy for us to say, oh yeah, no, city could take this on in a bigger, strategy and plan. I think they could, but the finance mechanism is the big piece. And I was reading some of these, like the ODS, some of I wrote it down in Title IX, the common open space, and some of the amenity options that you can choose. I mean, I don't know if this makes sense, but could ODS have a fund to support common area trees that would go to the city rather than putting it on the owner to try to fit it in somewhere that it might not make sense for a courtyard or a cottage having something? That's one thing, but to benefit a whole area that's on the frontage way side, could it just go towards city taking care of something for the greater common good? That goes for even public art too, but that's kind of another story there. I'm like, okay, a big glass vase that they fund, maybe someone doesn't care about that, but could it go into a more maintaining the beautiful fountain we have at the gardens? It's like kind of that same strategy. Like if the developer has to check a box anyway, could it go towards more city funded goods for the whole community? So that's kind of like where my mind's at with that. Art and trees. I'm sneaking it in there, guys.
Let me just respond to that, which is a very interesting comment. So what you're really alluding to is what the city already does is development impact fee collection with every project. Every construction project, we have a set of development impact fees. They pay towards police, fire, streets, infrastructure. So right now we don't have a street tree program or a public art program in our development impact fee structure. Some cities do. So that would be something that would be a significant change to our development impact fee structure, would be a big effort to do that. Now we are going to be doing our whole development impact fee structure probably next year. We're waiting for the general plan to be done, because once the general plan's done and we outline all of our infrastructure needs for our city, then we have a baseline to start with for redoing our development impact fee structure. But it would have to wait until that time. So that would be a significant effort. Can't be done as part of ODS, but it's a very interesting suggestion as part of the bigger picture for development impact fees. And is, seriously something that could ultimately become that if the city council chose to go that way. They can include things like public art, street trees. Right now, we have a parks and open space component of our development impact fee structure, for example, and fees do go towards parks and developing new parkland and open space.
Yeah, and thanks for giving me that terminology. It definitely is something that I am aware of in a budget list, but development impact fees. Yes, exactly that. So I think that even though it's slightly off topic, I think it is part of that bigger picture of, okay, I know if Nick, you're listening, I understand you've got some words with me. But yes, I think it can be done. And that's, I think, my bigger point there. Looking to the future as we plan, even the climate action plan, which we don't really have. I've been waiting to look at when we're going to sink our teeth into that. And I get that there was bigger pressing deadlines for us to meet on other ordinances and plans that are coming down from the state level too. But implementation strategies, like these things that we could check off other lists, and ecological services of trees in general. I think people maybe think I've heard of, the gingerbread stuff. I think that there's more to be done to educate the public on why we need a bigger strategy on how to fund this. So yeah.
You're such a tree hugger. I
That's all
love
right with
it.
me.
I love it. I actually really like that idea of just having an impact fee. Like everybody who builds something just adds a little bit to the pot. I will.
I will say I wasn't necessarily saying that it's a blanket thing, but it could be a choice of which they choose. So.
Yeah, and I don't
Right,
think it,
yeah, yeah.
and I don't think it can be a choice. It would have to be a blanket thing. And then development impact fees are a one-time charge. So we would have to establish some sort of citywide tax district and have a vote of the public to do ongoing maintenance financing. So there's a couple layers that would come into play there.
And many of the agencies that I work with, they've established landscape and lighting districts through the downtown areas where the businesses fund the maintenance of the landscaping and lighting. And it's on part of the property taxes.
It might be a good thing to sort of pull the areas where this would be affected and say like,
Yeah, so because these are ministerial, so we do our community facilities districts when we do new development projects that have a discretionary component, and that community facilities district you vote into. And of course, we don't issue you permits unless you vote yes. And because it's discretionary, we've said that we can do that. So for ministerial projects, we don't have a mechanism that would allow us to do that. So it would likely be, we could try and establish a district, but it would likely be a citywide tax that would have to be voted on and approved by two-thirds of the population. And then it would be a tax on the annual tax roll.
well, that makes it more complicated. Did the city attorney rain on our parade just then? Is that what happened? That's what happened, isn't it?
I hope not. Oh, I hope not too much. But yeah, you're correct. If you use a tax structure, you would need to put that to a vote of the general public.
Okay. Commissioner Schmidt, did you have some thoughts?
Yeah, I've been waiting for the AB 1600 study for a long time. I think the fact that I would be someone who had a piece of property, I would want to put the trees on my property. And there were going to be people like us who would do that. And then there'd be other people who don't want to do that. So if there's a way of building some type of flexibility as we look into this potentially in the future, is maybe we just need more tiers, and maybe that'd be more difficult to create, but then have options built within the tiers that you pay this amount if you do this, and you pay that amount if you do that. You have it set up already. I mean, even right now, although I think ADUs have changed a little bit. For the longest time, we've had the lowest impact fee for a second, what was a second residence. And we, when it comes to costs for things, I mean, right now, just for a water meter connection, for a water connection, which is what, $20,600, and in the development impact fee, that's somewhere between 16, 17, and $18,000. That's $40,000 just starting off on a project, and that becomes prohibitive. So I like the thought of what my esteemed colleague to my right has talked about. But I think we need to really think it through and get it correct this the first time we do it. I'm very skeptical about having trees on private property and them not being maintained. And I would recommend going with number 4 still, and keeping what we have. I would change the type of trees that we have in that program. I think that.
So right now we don't do trees in the sidewalk outside of downtown. So number 4 would be no trees unless we developed a taxation district. So I just want to be clear that that's what that is so that everybody's on the same page.
And not necessarily a taxation district, but a financing mechanism. How could we finance the additional staff and the maintenance that we aren't able to afford today?
Well, we're
So I don't
doing it
know,
now. I
and
mean,
staff could, I mean, our council could reorganize our budget to get there. It wouldn't have to be a tax mechanism, but it is a big leap, a big shift. But these are the things we have to throw out there.
We
So-
have, yeah, even maintenance wise now, we have sycamore trees. That's a tree that's allowed, and it makes a mess. And I see city workers every winter time before rains cleaning out the storm drains so they don't flood, and or cause flooding and so on. I need to think about this a little bit more. So thank you.
Commissioner Anderson?
Well, while we're on the subject of trees, I'm personally for the idea that most trees should be privately maintained, because anytime you put something into a tax base, it can run away. And I'm all for a tax base for downtown and for like the parks and stuff like that. We really, those are really well-known community areas. We start getting into residential, you start getting into like multifamily units and that crossover. I think it would just become more maintenance for the city to deal with. You know, most people like their neighborhood. They're going to plant a tree. They're going to take care of it, you know, especially if it's a project. And I know that there are places that don't. They get run down. But then people tend to come back and revamp them. You know, there's a cycle to it. So keeping it out of the city's purview of having to deal with that would be, I think, a lot better. Which one?
Yeah, which one do you like?
Let me think about it.
Okay. Commissioner Heath, do you have an opinion down there?
I was looking through the different numbers and they've all got pluses and minuses. And it just, to me, it kind of depends on the design of the project as far as how the trees would fit into it.
Yeah.
So I'm just having some issues trying to wrap my head around a blanket statement saying trees will be this.
Well, that's kind of what I said too early, was having that menu where we can give them options of size of trees and number of trees based on their square footage of frontage, and give them that flexibility, and we still get our trees, you know? That way, because I find that if you can give people choices, it sort of, then it's like, oh, it's my idea to put that, I don't know, juniper tree there. And so I want to take care of that juniper tree. I don't know. That was just the first one. Anyway, So I kind of like that idea, but I think that it would take, more, someone who knows about trees more than I.
Yes, welcome to the conundrum of objective standards.
Yes. I mean, is there a way to do that objectively? If you,
I think that there probably could be, and maybe I'll let Genevieve just weigh in on maybe not details because we're not there yet, but some overarching ideas about that.
Genevieve, do you know trees? Are you gonna educate us about trees now too?
Nope, but I
Okay.
can about zoning codes. I think that what I'm hearing is that there is a desire for flexibility. And so I think because there are so many nuanced situations, thinking through especially the menu of options, and perhaps there is, perhaps there's a way that we can list a variety of different options to meet the intended goal, that will provide enough flexibility to kind of do maybe 1 and 2 and 3 a little bit in certain situations. It's a complicated problem, but I've seen kind of what you're looking at, the idea of kind of like putting a cost measure on it, or just like an amount of like units. I've seen that especially in like the city of LA does that for landscaping. So we kind of rank kind of the things that you do, and if you reach a certain ranking threshold because you've done enough, then you comply. So I could see a way where that that type of design could work.
Thank you. Yes, Commissioner Kronza.
Okay, thanks again. Can we also go back way earlier in the presentation to what the piece where it says which zones are actually being talked about for the ODS?
That's way up there.
I know.
I was gonna say, that's a lot of slides.
Well, let's just take a little gander again. Let's go back to memory lane. Okay, so if we look, the multifamily zones, because I think Commissioner Anderson over there, he made a good point. So I just wanted to review that list here. Because I mean, I'm really empathetic to, okay, what do we not want or what do we want to avoid, right? But then there's the, okay, well then what solutions are going to get us there? Because if we only look at what we don't want, I don't think that's a holistic management plan right there of how we're going to get to what we do want. So if we're just trying to avoid something. So, all right, we got downtown office, downtown commercial, commercial service, retail, professional, neighborhood. But then it sounds like where you draw the line, not to, put the hot light over there, but I am interested in the discussion. The multifamily, like not having them incur a fee or extra taxation for more common trees, but something like a citywide, but not a citywide, more of a downtown taxation district, like for some of those more common street trees and landscaping that we want more of and more attention to. I feel like that's where there's a blend between number 4 and then some of these other things where we want private property to cover, like the multifamily, we want to cover their own trees. But then when we get closer towards the downtown element, then maybe we can come over to my side on the city,
Well, I think it's also important to
same side.
note that a
I'm
lot
just
of,
proposing that there's,
Yeah.
that seemed important to me to make a distinction.
a lot of this is already developed. Like, we're not gonna get like hundreds of plans. It's not like we're gonna be able to re-street tree all of El Camino. I mean, there's limited properties that this is going to apply to. And of course, we want the open spaces to get developed, but like redoing, there are some buildings along El Camino that unless they're torn down and something completely new is built, we're not getting street trees there. So it's kind of like the limited number of spaces we have left. What do we want them to look like? And so trying to tax the whole, like, I don't know how you, like, they would have to like drill out a circle in the middle of the sidewalk and then plant a tree in there.
Well, look at the properties over by the cinema or the big old DG parking lots. There's there's pockets of
Right.
open space. And then there's not even the implementing new trees, but just sustaining what we have.
But like the
It's not-
property, yeah, I mean, the cinema's right up against the sidewalk. You know, so if we had like a bunch of commercial, I think that trying to get the citizens of Atascadero to sign on to a new tax might be better, but I feel like that's gonna be a really hard sell.
We're talking citywide versus commercial building
Well, I mean,
for a certain district.
yeah, I mean, so I don't know, Kelly kind of said that we wouldn't be able to do a district, it would have to be citywide. I don't know that we're big enough to like only tax 3 square blocks. I
I
mean,
think
is
she
that what we're
said it
talking
just
about?
couldn't be a tier option. but
Right.
District could be an option.
Can we make a tax district that's like that big on the map?
That's a great question. You know, I didn't prepare discussion about tax district today, so I don't think I can answer that kind of with confidence.
I don't think
right
we're gonna
now,
solve
but-
this today anyway, so you're good.
But I'm happy to look into that further and give you a more detailed response.
I
another
think
time.
you probably can. I think some cities do undergrounding districts, but then as a tax, we don't get to decide. You have to have 2/3 of the vote of the property owners to say, yes, I'm willing to pay extra taxes to maintain the street trees a mile away. So in theory, it's a great idea and would be lovely, but we have to think about, how realistic and feasible that might be if we are truly wanting street trees. So I think if we are on the fence about street trees and we're, fine with more pavement, then I think, that could be something to explore, but I wouldn't talk about it as if it could be a guaranteed thing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not crazy about more pavement, but I feel like we need to like frame it as an incentive to the property owners, like trees are great, you want trees because, and here's what you're required to plant, by the way.
Because there's social and economic benefit. and
Yeah,
environmental.
exactly. And they're beautiful and they provide shade and they're, the wind rustling through them, whatever. Yeah. Yes, Mr. Vanden Eyck.
It is possible to have a landscape and lighting district that just applies to certain properties. It certainly is. Of course, that would be a discussion for city council to take up, and then it would have to go through the whole 218 process. So that's nothing that we can approach today, but I'm dealing with a similar project or problem in the city of Guadalupe where Caltrans is coming through and they're going to want to do this complete streets project through downtown. And there's competing issues between the downtown owners wanting bigger street trees, but they can't be accommodated with a 10-foot sidewalk and zero lot line setbacks with the buildings. So Caltrans is coming in and saying, hey, we can add bulb outs, but then they're worried about removing parking. So there's competing things going on there. And I don't, it's a very complicated issue that we certainly can't decide on tonight, but I do agree with like probably a hybrid of number 1, 2, and 3. I think those are probably our best options. And I agree that if it's in the multifamily areas, that it should probably be on the property instead of in the street. But if it's in the downtown or the commercial zones, it should probably be a street tree in the public right of way. That's my thought.
Did we help?
Yeah, and
Oh,
I can
good.
probably boil this down. I mean, this question is really not about the downtown. Downtown's already done because we already allow trees in the right of way. We have that requirement. We can fit them. So we have big sidewalks. This is about outside of that. And I think really what we're looking for you is kind of more of a general direction anyway. Should we be pushing street trees for these areas where they can't fit today? And should they be on private land or in the public right of way? And the public right of way is problematic. We've kind of expressed that to you. Private land is easier, except there's a concern about how it infringes upon the rights of the property. So I think what I've heard in general from the commission is have flexibility. Don't take away their property rights to develop. but we still want to see trees. And can the building design accommodate it? And I think it can. And, you know, 1, 2, and 3 has those options. So I think we're feeling, you know, it's a tough topic. It's not, there's no easy one size fits all. Hey, this is it. This is your perfect answer. It's not. Each building is different. Each site is different. Sometimes you're going to get multiple buildings in one project and it's easy. You can put those trees in the divides of the buildings. You can have little inserts in the building where a tree fits. You don't have to have a blanket setback. I think what we first went through with was a blanket setback. And I think in our first vision, that was perfect, but politically that may not fly. So I think we're going to probably go forward with here's a couple of different ways to do this. Let's have a menu of potential options for developers would probably be the best approach.
And make city council decide. That's why they get paid the big bucks. Okay, so I did remember my questions. Can we go back to questions for staff? Okay. I was curious, what is the ratio of commercial versus residential in a mixed use? Do we have fixed percentages of that?
No, not yet. We like
Oh.
to one day, and we will
Okay.
when we create these mixed use districts. with
Okay.
A new general plan and we create a new zoning ordinance. And we'll talk about those ratios for certain areas, but we don't have that today.
What we have is a requirement for the ground floor to be all commercial and then residential on the upper floors. We do allow some things like residential garages and your mail room on the ground floor, but in general, it has to be all commercial on the ground floor.
And then if we're doing a 2 or 3 story building, are elevators required for ADA requirements?
Generally, they are. We do have a
Okay.
couple exceptions for smaller projects.
Okay. And then my other question was, do we have like a review plan to make sure that these are still working? Are we just gonna see how they kind of go with the projects coming through? And if we're suddenly running up against a lot of walls, maybe it's time to review it.
Yeah, I don't think we have a specific plan, but I can tell you that if these don't work, we're all going to be frustrated and we will come back and fix them.
We throw them out the window and set them on fire.
I think a lot of them will work. We've spent a lot of time making sure
And-
they will work, but I'm sure
yes.
there will be some nuances that we need to sort out.
Right. It's just, design types, like what's in vogue kind of changes. And hopefully these will be able to be flexible with that we don't have to like change them every, 10 years or whatever. I was just kind of curious if you guys. have
We're
thought
hoping
about
with the
that.
menu approach that it can accommodate a lot of different design styles.
Cool. Any other comments or questions for staff? Oh, my Lord. Yes, Commissioner Schmidt.
Yeah, and about the street tree thing, I think we have to kind of project that, we're thinking immediate at this point, but we're projecting, 60, 70 years down the road too at the same time. And as the value of Atascadero increases, there will be projects that will be ripped out because it's going to be more affordable to do that and start anew. And that's when the things will come into play at that point. So there will be some construction that will be here for the next 100 years. And but that's going to change. And then we also have right now, and I don't know, we have a sales tax right now for road improvements. And that was purposely written the way it is, so we wouldn't need the supermajority vote, and it passed with a simple majority. I don't know if there's anything within that discusses about aesthetic issues or something, but if maybe a similar tax issue that deals with street trees, and see if someone would be, the community would be interested in supporting it this somewhat the same way as what we did with the sales tax. I mean, there wasn't a simple, a super majority of the votes out there. We knew that, and that's why it was worded the way it was at the time. And then we have our oversight group and does their thing to make it work. And it's been pretty successful. But I think, again, we have to project our thoughts to the future, and things might not happen within our lifetime, but we're talking about the next life. So anyway, thank you.
Commissioner Kranza?
All right, in detail thinking about how some of these get completed. So I check a box and I check another box and I meet my ODS requirements, so we do it. Then the conditions of approval piece, I mean, I imagine it's Public Works, but is there like arborists that review them? Are they doing any kind of check with how the trees are maturing? And, instead of applying things to them to stunt them and then having them become problematic and it not working, because even, miniature or dwarf or not dwarf a lot of the times, but I'm just curious about that piece of how we can maybe mitigate some of those issues to begin with if we're allowing like most of the trees to be privately picked and owned. Like how are we ensuring that from the beginning we don't really set them up for failure?
So I think part of that is trying to ensure that there's enough space for the tree to grow. And then part of that, as we mentioned, as Dennis was asking earlier, is about the enforcement piece. So we do have pieces in our code that allow us to enforce landscaping on commercial multifamily properties. And then so it's a matter of prioritizing enforcement if that's what the council so chooses to do.
And then as far as recommendations to council on that, it's like, is it who's enforcing? Is it a director of sorts that's over taxed with 20 different hats on, or is it something that could be a assistant for that role that's already doing other things? So I'm just curious.
Yeah, we all as staff generally are also in charge of code enforcement.
Thank you.
There is a police officer I know, at least one that works part-time that does code enforcement. You call the police, the non-emergency line, and you say, hey, my neighbor, or I saw this thing on El Camino and I'm pretty sure this is against code. Can you go check it out? And he will.
She will.
Oh, she? Oh,
Yeah.
the one I met was a gentleman. Maybe he's
That was some
retired.
time ago. So now we
Okay.
have Ayla Tomac. She's our code enforcement officer. That's what she does full time. She does have a code enforcement vehicle. She works with community development extensively. We help her along with the planning and zoning and building codes. And she is our key person for enforcement. But each of us in community development also have a role in enforcement where we, assist and educate the public, and we write that first letter of response on issues, but work with Ayla to carry enforcement out when we don't get results we want. So it's a pretty good system and it's all working really well right now.
Awesome. Anything else, gentlemen?
Oh, and by the way, I did want to thank you for that weed abatement notice that went out.
The fire
Thank-
department says you're welcome.
Yeah, the fire captain.
Gives
not
my
here right
husband a
now.
heart attack every year. I'm like, it's May. It's fine. We have an exemption. We have goats. They're eating the grass. We don't have to mow it. It's fine.
June 1 is your deadline.
You're fine.
This year it seems a lot moister and greener than it has been in years past, but June 1st is still that deadline.
Yeah.
I will also just put out there that almost everybody receives that notice. They don't go property by property. They blanket areas that are likely to have weeds. So don't feel personally offended.
We were blanketed too, but they have the wrong assessor's parcels and addresses on it. And so
I will tell my husband that because he feels like it is personally addressed to him. He takes it very personally. And now I'm on public record saying that, so I'll probably get in trouble.
I think it's funny because my property has a very small lawn and there's like really no weeds to abate it. And my neighbor actually mows it for me because it's so small. So it's done.
So we have to make a motion, right? To send this to city council?
So we have a slide, the recommendation that I didn't read to you, which is asking you to adopt the draft resolution A, recommending the council introduce an ordinance for first reading by title only to establish objective design standards for multifamily and mixed-use developments and update existing development standards as needed for consistency. Quote unquote, that would be Title IX.
And so that's us saying, yes, we like this. City council, you should review it.
But we took notes on some of the discussions and comments you've had. And unless you have other comments, yes, you can move forward with this to move it to the city council.
Okay, would anyone like to make a motion?
I move. Hello?
I'll
There you go.
second.
Wasn't working. I make a motion to accept the resolution as written.
Would you like to include anything about street tree options?
I would definitely like to strike and the option to have street trees funded by taxes.
Maybe I can summarize what Phil summarized.
Yeah, could you?
And you could see if you would like to include that in your motion.
There we go, yeah.
So I think we talked about developing a similar menu style option for street trees that would allow some flexibility in what people could do along their frontage. Some might include more reduced setbacks and some might include greater with greater tree spacing, but a menu of options that would allow somebody to choose what would work best for their property behind the sidewalk.
Yes, exactly. Yes. I like flexibility. I think property owners like that as well. So.
And I would definitely second that.
Let's just pause before we take a vote real quick.
So what we're looking for is we have to actually find the section that talks about street trees so we can reference that. So we're very clear on the direction that we're giving in the final action.
Of course, this is just a recommendation to council, right? They're gonna make the
Yes.
decisions.
Genevieve, I don't know if you have it up digitally, if you could search and try and find, we're looking at the paper version.
In the recommendation itself, or in the resolution?
Yeah,
Correct.
what code section would those amendments be under?
I think it's 9-4.109. No, that, 9-4.125 is street trees, A3.
Or is it the 3.262C4? 3.262C4, is that Title IX common open space or no?
Yeah, that's open space, but we're talking specifically about street
Yeah.
trees.
I
And-
think that we are at 9-4.125.
Yes.
Number 5. Sure we're at A5 of that section, on page 79 of our packet. And so the motion would include amendments to that section to include a menu of flexible options for street tree plantings for commercial and multifamily development. And hopefully we can throw in something that says and update any other sections that would be inconsistent with that, because I know there's a couple minor modifications and a few other sections that we'd need to make match. So Jason, as the motion maker, if you would like to amend your motion to say that what we just said, 9-4.125, section A5 be amended with minor updates to other sections for consistency.
Yes. I didn't want to assume that I had to restate all the options. So.
No.
So you got it. Thank you.
So just FYI, on the checklist menu, on the mixed use project checklist, page 1, under landscaping, street trees, you have it listed as 9-4.125 A3, and it should be A5. And that's just a typo.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. I guess we're voting now.
Okay, I think we need a second. Is there a
Or
second?
at least clarify that the second agrees with the
Oh.
amended motion.
Yes, I will still second and would like to add the amendment that was discussed for street trees.
Okay, Commissioner Anderson,
Yes.
Commissioner Heath,
Yes.
Commissioner Carranza,
No.
Commissioner Schmidt,
No.
Vice Chairperson Vanden Eyck,
Yes.
Chairperson Keen.
Yes.
Motion passes 4-2.
I guess it's time for director's report.
We can do that. Thank you, Chair. Just one moment. Let me pull out my schedule and tell you what's coming. I think what we go to first of all, is there's any commissioner comments and reports. We can bypass that if there aren't any.
Commissioner Schmidt has a report for us.
All right.
I have a comment. I've been noticing, the signs that we have for our election, those little plastic signs with the metal snakes being put in. A number of commercial businesses are plopping those around town anywhere, anyhow, and they don't care because it's probably cheap advertisement. And wondering, is there anything that we can do from that kind of littering from happening? They're everywhere.
All signs require sign permits. So if it's a sign that's put in without a permit, unless it's a temporary banner, which is allowed in some cases, then it's something we will need to enforce. So we'll take a look.
So I'm saying that the ones that I see, if you have a permit, you have to put it on your property, correct? I would imagine.
Yeah, you cannot do an off-site sign. You cannot
Yeah.
do a sign in the public right of way.
Of
Your
the
sign has to be
ones-
on private land.
Of the ones that I see, they're on high view shed corners, and people just put them there. It's two men in a truck type signs. There's a lot of those, and there's quite a few. So,
So noted. Thank you.
thank you.
Any other commissioner comments or reports? Okay, Phil, now it's all you.
All right. So on the 21st, we're going to come back and we have several items. It's going to be a long night. So I'm hoping to get a good attendance from the public, good attendance from the commission. We've actually got 4 items. They're stacking up. One of those is the long-awaited commercial property at Dove Creek at the corner of El Camino Real and Santa Barbara. It's coming through with a mixed-use project. This one's a good one. We're hoping this is going to be the one. But that neighborhood is also very concerned about anything that develops there. So we're bringing that forward on the 21st. It is an amendment to the PD. It's going to make its way to city council as well. We also have a conditional use permit for we'll call it a telecom site, but it's really just a cell tower thing, a small one. And that one's going to be, where is that location? Off of Traffic Way. And then somebody wants to put in a smoke shop. And that requires a CUP. That falls under the land use of personal services restricted. And so they want to sell cigarettes, tobacco, glass bongs, whatever, all that stuff. So that's a proposal. And then right now we have a towing company on Traffic Way. They're called Barber Towing, a little towing company, kind of a startup. They are actually getting a new location and they want to apply for a conditional use permit for a nice little vacant building that's existing on San Luis Avenue right next to the Blast and Brew. Perfect location for them because there's already a little yard there, a little building there, and they want to operate an auto repair and towing service there, which is ideal against the freeway there. So that's a CUP that's coming your way. So lots to do on the 21st, lots coming your way. And multiple staff will be here presenting those particular items. And then I also wanted to mention to you that our long-awaited downtown infrastructure enhancement plan will be starting this summer. The actual construction plans are out for bid. I think bids are due, I think it might be this Thursday. So hopefully we get a contractor on board for that and get the groundbreaking going for that this summer. That's really exciting. And then our general plan update is continuing to move forward. Lots of good stuff happening there. We did at the city council some time ago adopt kind of what was the name of the map? What do we call it? What's the special name for our preferred alternative, or there's another name for it. Anyway, the council has ratified a draft land use map, and now we're going to start getting into policy work. We'll bring some stuff to you soon on that. So that's a big project that's going to be taking us for quite some time. And then otherwise, I'm here to answer any questions you have on development projects or policy work that's happening around town. If you have any questions for me, thank you.
The grocery store at Del Rio and El Camino is coming along nicely. I can give a report on that because I drive by it every day.
Marketplace, Valley Fresh.
Yeah.
There's also going to be mixed use over there. There's going to be some workspaces over there. There's going to
Yeah.
be some restaurants over there and a distillery.
I'm so excited. I can
Yes.
walk there, so I can just go down
Yes.
there and then have a beer
Yes.
and then walk home. It'll be awesome. Any other comments or questions for Phil? No? Commissioner Heath, you look like you just would like to go home. Any questions or comments? No? I think that's it. So, we done? Okay, I'm
We're
going
done
to,
when you say we're done.
that's right. I have all the power and the gavel. Okay, I'm gonna adjourn this meeting for May 7th, and we will have our next meeting on May 21st. Same place, same time.